The children we left behind. I've spent my whole life asking myself why they left. Not just once, not just a fleeting thought in the back of my mind, but every single day. Why my mother and father chose themselves over me, over us, their own children. And even now, decades later, as they write letters begging for help, I realize the answer isn't simple. It's selfishness. It's fear. It's cowardice. But it's also real, because it shaped me in ways I'm still trying to understand. I was 8 when it happened. 8, and already learning that the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally can vanish without warning. My little brother, Jamie, was 5. He cried in his crib while I held his hand, trying to comfort him, while they packed their bags in the middle of the night. I remember my father's sighs, the way my mother whispered, almost to herself, that they had to go, that we'd be better off without them around. And then the door closed, and the echo of it slammed into my chest harder than any hand ever could. We were left with our grandmother, who was kind in the way people are when they're too old and too poor to give you the life you deserve. She fed us, made sure we went to school, patched our scraped knees. But she couldn't replace what we lost. She couldn't be our parents. She couldn't erase the nights we cried ourselves to sleep wondering if we'd ever see them again, or if they even remembered our faces. For years, I held on to the memory of their promises. My mother said she loved us. My father said they'd return once they found themselves. I believed it, in part because I had no other option. Hope is a survival instinct for children, especially children abandoned by the people who are supposed to keep them safe. And then, as the years stretched on, that hope twisted into something heavier. Resentment. Anger. The kind that sits in your bones and keeps you awake at night. When I was 12, I stopped waiting for them to come home. By 15, I hated them. By 18, when I graduated high school and stood at the edge of my first apartment lease, I realized they had become strangers. And yet, a part of me, an angry, aching, persistent part, wanted to see them fall apart, to understand what it felt like to be abandoned, to be left alone in the world. I never spoke to them again after leaving for college. I built my life cautiously, brick by brick, afraid to rely on anyone. Friendships were complicated, intimacy was terrifying. I wanted nothing in life that I could lose so completely and be left to rebuild alone. And in many ways, that is the life they gifted me, the one I never asked for, the one they ensured I could never forget. And now, decades later, they have the audacity to ask for my help. The first letter arrived 6 months ago. Handwritten, shaky, almost pleading. My father wrote about his health, his mistakes, and the regrets he said they could no longer carry alone. My mother added a note, less apologetic, more desperate, about financial struggles, illnesses, and the loneliness they had finally come to understand. I held the letters in my hands for hours. I didn't open them at first, afraid of the weight inside. When I finally did, I read every word slowly, savoring the bitterness of the truth. They thought they could just show up in my life after years of absence and expect absolution, love, assistance. That somehow I would forget the nights we cried ourselves to sleep, the meals we had to skip, the school uniforms my grandmother patched together while she prayed silently to the ceiling for mercy on their souls. I folded the letters carefully, set them on the counter, and made no move to respond. For days, I walked around my apartment as if carrying them physically would make the emotional weight lighter. It didn't. It never does. And here's the confession, part of me wants to see them suffer. Not in a cruel way, but in a way that matches the fear and despair they caused me. They never considered our needs. They never worried about our nights alone, the dinners we made from leftover vegetables, the holidays we celebrated with absent parents and forced smiles. Now, in their old age, they want my mercy. They want my help. They want what they abandoned decades ago. I will not give it to them. Because love is earned. Because loyalty is demonstrated. Because forgiveness is not owed. I learned that lesson hard. And every day since, it has shaped every relationship I have, every decision I make, every boundary I enforce. I remember my grandmother's voice, "They left, but you are still strong. You are still capable. You are still loved." She died 5 years ago, leaving me with nothing but the memory of what they should have been. And I cling to that memory now, not out of comfort, but out of necessity. She believed in me when they didn't. And I honor her by refusing to hand them the satisfaction of their return. The calls started a month after the letters. My mother first, then my father. They were hesitant at first, their voices trembling with the kind of false gentleness people use when they've done something unforgivable. "We just want to talk," they said. "We just want to explain." But I knew better. I had spent a lifetime learning the difference between words and actions. They had abandoned us once, they could do it again in a heartbeat. And still, a small, irrational part of me, maybe the part that was still a little child hiding under the covers, wanted to pick up the phone. Wanted to hear the voice I once loved, the voice I once trusted. I didn't. They left voicemails, polite and regretful. Sometimes angry, sometimes pleading. I saved them all. I listened once, maybe twice, and then I deleted them. Not because I wanted to, but because each replay made the memories sharper, the hollow nights, the fear, the loneliness. Their voices were like knives dipped in sugar, sweet and familiar, but cutting to the bone. And every time I considered calling back, I felt the same familiar tightness in my chest, the same old panic. Because I knew what would happen if I answered. I would let them back in. And I would be betrayed again, not by choice, but by the simple fact that my trust had a half-life of 30 years, and theirs had always been empty. I remember the first time I saw my father on TV, decades after they left. It wasn't an accident. I didn't recognize him at first. He was older, thinner, smiling at a camera, giving some speech about community work. They had built a life that didn't include us, and somehow, despite the mistakes they had made, they looked content, happy. It made my stomach twist into knots. The universe had rewarded the people who had abandoned me. And I was left with every consequence of their choices, carrying it alone. The neighbors sometimes ask why I never visit my parents now that they are old. They don't understand. They see the frailty, the need, the regret that must be there, but what they don't see is the decades of absence, the nights we slept hungry, the birthdays and graduations and Christmas mornings they skipped. Absence doesn't age like the body, it ages like the soul. And theirs was fractured beyond repair. I work now, alone, in a small office in a city that feels permanent because I refuse to let them dictate my movements. I live with my choices and the silence they earned. I am capable, strong, careful, and yet every day is haunted by the specter of what they should have been. They should have been our protectors. They should have been our refuge. They chose themselves instead. Sometimes I imagine a confrontation. I imagine sitting them down and telling them everything. Telling them that I remember the small things, the way my father never taught me to ride a bike because he left before I learned, the way my mother didn't attend my first school play because she was too busy finding herself, the way they left us to the mercy of strangers while they pursued selfish freedom. I imagine their faces, the flicker of recognition, the shame that might flicker in their eyes. But I don't need that moment. I already know the truth, there is no redemption for people who abandon their children. And yet, part of me grieves. Not for them. Not for their regrets. For the child I was, the one who wanted to be loved, the one who cried herself to sleep, the one who whispered into the dark hoping someone would come back. I grieve for the life we might have had if they had been present. I grieve for the security, the warmth, the laughter they could have given us. I grieve for the innocence stolen by their selfishness. I will never forgive them. And maybe that is the most human thing I can do. Because forgiveness without accountability is a lie. Love without respect is a lie. And they were liars who walked away, leaving me and my brother to piece together our own reality from the shards they left behind. And so I keep my distance. I answer nothing. I help nothing. I allow no second chance, no easing of the past. Because I have learned, painfully, that some wounds are not meant to be closed. Some losses are permanent. Some parents are gone long before the funeral. But I remember. Oh, how I remember. Every detail, every night, every promise they broke. I carry it all like a monument to their absence, a testament to the fact that children left behind do not forget. We do not forgive. And we do not bend, no matter how much they plead. It wasn't just letters and calls anymore. They started showing up. My parents, in their frailty, thinking that time had erased the past. My mother first, stepping onto my doorstep with a basket of bread and apologies tucked into the corners. My father following days later, carrying a suitcase and a story about how sick he had been, how alone he felt. I let them stand on the threshold, watched them shuffle in their age and weakness, and said nothing. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I didn't slam doors. I simply stared. And I think that was worse than any punishment I could have inflicted. My silence was a mirror. They saw themselves in it. And maybe they realized, finally, that their children were no longer the little ones they could control or manipulate with promises. They asked me to help them financially, to look after their health, to stay with them during nights they feared. And I refused. Not with harshness, not with malice, just with the quiet certainty that had grown in me over decades. I had learned that love is not given, it is earned, and they had forfeited every ounce of credit for it. My brother, Jamie, supported me silently through it. He never wanted to see them again, but he never needed to explain why. We shared a glance one day as they lingered in my hallway, hoping for reconciliation. That glance said everything: we are not theirs anymore. We never will be. They wept. They begged. They recounted every hardship of their lives, every illness, every lost opportunity. They tried to paint themselves as victims of circumstance, of fate, of mistakes that anyone could have made. But I had learned to see through stories like those. Their suffering did not erase the suffering they had caused. Their regrets did not erase the years they left us alone. And their desperation now was nothing but a testament to their misjudgment. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the child I once was. She would have opened the door. She would have forgiven too easily. She would have begged them to stay. But the adult I became, forged in years of abandonment, knows the truth: some people never learn, some people never change, and some people can never be trusted with what matters most. I remember one evening, watching them leave my apartment after yet another futile plea. My mother looked at me, tears streaming, voice cracking: "We're sorry. We were wrong. Please, just help us now." And my father, frail and tired, nodded in agreement. And I stood there, silent, watching them retreat into the night. Not because I didn't care, but because I could no longer risk the pain of trust that was never deserved. They had lost the right, decades ago, when they walked away. The grief I feel is complex. It is not the grief of missing someone who is gone. It is the grief of realizing that the people who should have protected me, loved me, and guided me were never equipped to do so. And worse, it is grief that comes with clarity: they will age, they will falter, they will need care, but it will not come from me. The decision is not cruelty, it is survival. It is the bitter lesson that sometimes love is strongest when it is withheld from those who do not deserve it. And still, I remember them. Every sound, every touch, every broken promise. I remember the mornings we woke alone, the nights we cried silently in our rooms, the holidays we celebrated with hollow hearts. And I remember the anger that gave me strength, the fear that made me cautious, and the sorrow that taught me who I am. I am the child they abandoned, yes, but I am also the adult who survived. I am the one who did not break under their absence. I am the one who has learned the full measure of regret, and I wield it as a shield, not a weapon. Because some lessons are too costly to forget. It was in the quiet of winter when they tried everything. Not just letters, not just calls, not just the brief, awkward visits. They began to send gifts. Packages filled with food, small luxuries, things I might have loved as a child, chocolates I hadn't eaten in years, books that reminded me of bedtime stories they once read, clothes folded so neatly it almost seemed like care. And for a moment, a brief, aching moment, I allowed myself to remember what it felt like to be wanted, to be considered important. And then I remembered the years they weren't there. I remembered the cold floors, the empty kitchen, the birthday cakes that never appeared, the nights I cried into the corners of my bed, the mornings I woke to find no one there to brush my hair or fix my breakfast or tell me it would all be okay. I remembered every abandonment, every silent scream, every hollow promise. And I knew that their gifts were not love, they were a transaction. They were an attempt to buy back years they could never repay. My brother Jamie and I sat together at the kitchen table one evening, surrounded by the packages, letters, and empty boxes that had accumulated over weeks. He looked at me, his eyes tired but resolute, and said, "We can't. We won't." They made their choice. And I nodded, because I had already known it, deep down in every nerve of my body. We were not responsible for their redemption. The escalation came slowly, painfully. My father sent a letter with a doctor's note detailing illnesses and complications he claimed would be unbearable without our help. My mother called daily, her voice trembling, imploring, crying. "You're all we have left," she said. "Please, don't leave us like this." And every time, I could hear the child I used to be, the 8-year-old who wished desperately for them to stay, the little girl who had curled up with Jamie on cold nights hoping they would come back, pleading silently, begging me to open the door, to forgive, to let them in. But that child no longer had the keys. That child no longer existed in a world where abandonment could be forgotten. She was gone. And what remained was the adult who had survived, who had built a life without them, and who understood that some wounds never heal, not because we are cruel, but because love cannot thrive where it has been betrayed so utterly. I remember one night, lying in bed, the letters spread across the floor like fallen leaves, and thinking, they are old now. They will not live forever. One day they will be gone, and I will never have said a word. I could imagine my grandmother's voice, soft but stern, whispering across time, "You are not responsible for what they refuse to do. You are not the parent they never were." And so I did nothing. Years passed. The letters stopped. The calls ceased. I never knew if they finally gave up, if illness or age finally forced them to accept what they had done. It didn't matter. I had my life, and I had my peace, bitter, scarred, haunted, but mine. And in the quiet moments, I understood the full measure of my survival. I had turned the abandonment they inflicted into armor. I had built a life from the ruins they left behind. I am haunted by them, yes. I am haunted by the images of the little girl I once was, the one who believed in their return, the one who held her brother's hand in trembling hope. But I am also resolute, strong, and unwilling to allow their mistakes to define me again. I am the one who refused to grant them redemption, because it was never mine to give. And in that refusal lies the full tragedy. The parents who abandoned us are left with their regrets, their pleas unanswered, and the children they left behind have grown into adults who will not forgive, not because we are cruel, but because we learned too young what it means to survive without them. Theirs is a life of longing. Ours is a life of self-preservation. And the bitterest, most heartbreaking truth is that time does not erase absence. It only sharpens it. Decades have passed since I last saw them, since I last heard their voices pleading for a chance I would never give. And still, The echoes of their absence resonate in everything I do. Their abandonment was not a single moment, it was a lifetime of missing pieces, a constant lesson in what it feels like to be invisible to those who should have loved you most. I have a life now. A quiet, structured life built from the ruins of what they left behind. I have friends, work, small joys, the occasional laughter that doesn't feel forced. But even in this life, there is a shadow. A memory of childhood dinners where chairs were empty. Of Christmas mornings where the only gifts were the ones we could afford ourselves. Of nights lying awake beside my brother, listening to the wind whisper through the cracked windows, hoping they might come back. That shadow is a reminder that some scars never fade. I've learned, painfully, the truth about forgiveness. It is not a gift owed to the guilty. It is not a balm for their conscience. Forgiveness, in its purest form, is something you grant yourself to live, to heal, to survive. And I have forgiven myself, not them. I have survived. I have endured. I have lived in spite of the parents who abandoned me, in spite of the hollow years they left me to navigate alone. Sometimes I imagine what it would have been like if they had stayed. The life we might have had. The warmth we could have known. The lessons they might have taught me, not from books, but from love. And it breaks my heart in a way I cannot describe. Not because I wish to erase my survival, but because the child I once was deserved better than what they gave. I've learned that the most tragic reality is not their regret. It is the permanence of absence. It is the fact that they will never reclaim what they abandoned, that no tearful plea decades later can undo the years of solitude, the nights of fear, the childhood left to patch itself together. And it is the knowledge that we the children carry the echoes of that absence forever. Yet there is a strange beauty in the survival. We who were left behind are the ones who built lives of resilience. We are the ones who found strength in the spaces where they did not stand. We are the ones who learned that love, care, and attention are not guaranteed, but earned, and that boundaries are the most necessary gift one can give oneself. We learned to protect our hearts, to value our presence, and to live fully, even when the past demanded otherwise. And so I sit here, decades later, reflecting on everything they lost and everything I gained. They lost the chance to be parents, to love unconditionally, to witness the lives of the children they abandoned. And I, though scarred and marked by absence, gained the life they denied me, not because they chose me, but because I chose myself. I will never help them. I will never invite them back. And that is not cruelty. It is the culmination of a life shaped by survival, forged by absence, and tempered by the unwavering truth that some mistakes cannot be undone, some wounds cannot be healed, and some parents must remain absent even when they beg, even when they plead, even when they are old and frail. I am not proud of the bitterness that lingers. I am not proud of the anger that refuses to fade. But I am proud of the life I have built despite it, of the boundaries I have drawn, of the child I protected by refusing to let them back into my world. And in that, there is a quiet triumph, a bittersweet acknowledgement that survival is sometimes the greatest revenge, and sometimes, the only gift you can give yourself when those who should have protected you have chosen not to.